lifts your spirit this time of year. So I'm here to help lift spirits.
Totally. Always when it gets to that part, I'm like, oh, it's time to stop. Anyway, happy darn CultureCast Day, everybody. Welcome, 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 Jeffrey Siminoff, my friend, who is the SVP over at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization. Happy darn Thursday, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Happy to be here, and I'm your brother in pink today. So
I
it's a good.
know, I love it. We're vibing.
We are. It feels good to be here, always with
Yeah.
you.
I'm super excited. Before we really jump in, I know a lot of people had sent me some emails and texts ahead of this. They're just really fascinated with what it is that RFK Human Rights Organization does and what you're up to. But before we jump into this, what I love about knowing you and getting to know you is you've just got a really interesting background. Yes, you are the senior vice president of this organization, and you do a lot of amazing work in helping organizations focus on workplace dignity. But I want to get into who you are, my friend. Like, who is Jeffrey, right? Like, where did you grow up? How did you end up on this pathway towards workplace dignity? Let's go there.
Yeah, such a landscape when I think about it. I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey, sort of a quiet, shy kid, book focused, study focused. You know, kind of a confused kid in a lot of ways that I didn't really understand why until much later.
Hmm.
Um, but was a pretty diligent kid and went to undergrad at Duke. Um, Went to law school at Emory University after sort of a failed attempt at pre-med. When I was going to school, the sort of roadmap for my family was basically you're a doctor or you're a lawyer.
Oh my
The
goodness.
doctor part, the doctor part didn't work out after freshman chemistry at Duke, and so I went down the other route that seemed to be the only one available. And I studied law, and I became a lawyer. um, I practiced law during that formative time in my life. I think my family was and continues to be a really important part of my life. And when I graduated from law school, I think a lot of people were looking at big cities, and you know I was very focused on going back to New Jersey, working for a large law firm there. And what I didn't realize was that I was sort of a struggling with my sexual orientation, and
Hmm.
not know that I knew I was gay necessarily at the time, but I kind of knew. And I
Hmm.
just wanted to be in a place that was familiar and not, too much of an unknown. A bit of a mistake in a way in retrospect, because the opportunities to sort of explore myself more fully were very limited in a sort of, suburban sort of, New Jersey environment. So all of that didn't really get more fully explored until I, you know, developed sort of a private life while I was practicing law in New Jersey, and came to realize that I needed to be in a different place and I needed to explore other things. And so I said, okay, time to like get into New York City. And I got an in-house counsel job as a lawyer at Morgan Stanley, and I began working at Morgan Stanley shortly before 9/11, and then a lot of my life and my career and my perspectives on things changed a lot. And we could talk about that period
Yeah.
forward now or and whenever you like.
I mean, I think we should jump into that because I've had the fortunate opportunity to know you for a few years. And I think that story has really shaped, at least my point of view, kind of how you show up and who you are today. I didn't know this about you though. The fact that you grew up thinking you were going to be a doctor, I don't know if we talked about this. I started off as a biology major thinking I was going to be a doctor as well because that's what my parents thought I would be growing up. And after the first year of not having fun with bio and chem and math, I'm like, yeah, I've got to do something else. So I ended up in business. So we have that in common.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how like families and environments really shape a lot of the rest of our lives. And, you know, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, there's so much discussion right now on what children and young people can be exposed to in school. You know, people are trying to restrict a lot of things. And I was talking to my brother yesterday, in fact, last night, and saying, we're talking about this topic of like, what's available, what could people talk about to kids that are in, you know, K through 12 or in high school or college or whatever, don't say gay and all these things. And I said to my
Hmm.
brother last night, one of the things I wish more than anything, looking back on like the first half of my life, is that I wish that there had been more opportunities to have open conversations and to allow younger people to more comfortably explore who they are, who they could be, without, making them feel so stigmatized for what they believe they are. And I fear that we're falling back in certain ways and creating a lot of harm to young people who, may have to go on lockdown because of the messages that are starting to surround them.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting time.
Yeah. It's weird. It is a little bit like Back to the Future in that, I think about, you're right. I am also shaped by some negatives in my childhood. And I think it's that peer pressure that whatever kids bring into school, right, and what they learn at home, and that's all they know. And then if schools don't provide kind of a broader aperture for students to actually learn how the world is, it's hard and it defines you. And then you need to figure out a way how to break through that later on in life as coping, productive adult, right? And so that's interesting that you had that conversation with your brother last night because it's such a hot topic right now. Like what this next generation is being exposed to, and how can we really support their future growth so that they can be the leaders of the world, right? And that's why we're on this call. It's about how do we shape culture. But I want to go back to you. I want you to continue on. I think it's fascinating that you're able to get to New York, and I know that who you are as a lawyer, but then who you are as Jeffrey really came to life, I would say, in the experience that you had. And you shared a very personal story um, that I can't relate to, but I can understand how that could have shaped you. And I don't know if you want to get into it, you know,
Sure.
the New York 9/11 story.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of, I guess, like three crucial things that happened during my, you know, 13 or so years at Morgan Stanley. And so I was a junior-ish in-house employment lawyer at Morgan Stanley. My office at the time was in the World Trade Center in the South Tower on the 65th floor. And on that day, I, I had spoken with my parents the night before, complaining about an 8 a.m. meeting, which is relevant to the story. Um, my brother at the time, a different brother than the one I was speaking to last night, was on his way back to New York from Madrid. So it was in the air that morning. Um, and, we had a meeting in a corner conference room that was facing south. So not in a direct view of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And, into the meeting, the first plane hit the North Tower, which we couldn't see, of course, because we were facing south in the South Tower. But, there was debris, and I remember feeling like it was confetti, and I couldn't understand, or paper, and I couldn't understand how it could be so windy that paper was like 65 flights up. But, within moments, it was like chunks of stuff on fire flying by the window. And there had been a previous incident in the World Trade Center where there was a car bomb or something in a parking garage. And so some people in the meeting thought that something had happened that could have been like that. And so, we left, and, our training sort of tells us not to take an elevator. And so we walked down the stairs, and, it was a bit of misinformation. People coming into the stairwell suggesting that maybe a prop plane or some pilot error caused some sort of crash into the North Tower. But the view was that what had happened was, something unique to that building. And so it's tragically, a lot of people started going back out to their floors, or to a floor. It was very hot in the stairwell. And we kept going, and got down to the 27th floor, the person I was with, when the second plane hit our building. And so, Marisa, I guess I would describe it. I've never really been in an earthquake, but it felt to me like you could literally see the column, the stairwell column, kind of lurching.
Oh, wow.
And I remember grasping the railing because I felt like the building was going to fall over. And because we didn't have proper information, I just assumed, it didn't make any sense, but to me it must have been that the other building had sort of fallen over onto our, was the only, in any event, what had been a very orderly situation became very chaotic. We were able to get out of the tower, saw things that you really never wish you would have seen, in terms of what people who were higher up did. And, long story short, was able to get to our offices in Midtown Manhattan, was able to reach my family, which was, of course, freaking out because, they knew I was there that morning because I had complained the night before. My brother was sort of rerouted to Newfoundland, Canada. There's a Broadway show called Come From Away. That's all about his experience. But the relevance of all of it, I think, to why it's, besides it just being a very jarring event that affects you and stays with you forever, it related to how I think about my work and how I think about workplaces, because there were 2,000 people working for Morgan Stanley in the South Tower, all of whom, virtually all of whom survived, except for the team that was most responsible for our safety, which was the corporate security team, which mostly perished. But there were 2,000 workers that were in that building, and questions came up pretty quickly about, Morgan Stanley is a publicly traded company. They have clients, there's this push-pull between business and humanity in a way. And the questions came up around, when are those people in the World Trade Center going to get back to work? And so I recall being sort of pulled into conversations on this topic, very quickly, as a very junior lawyer, an employment law angle. And I remember taking the point of view in sort of my own fuzzied, traumatic state of, look, we're a global company. Those people in the World Trade Center are not really in a position to contribute in ways that you may wish. And so we need people in London and Singapore and Hong Kong, and quite frankly, Midtown Manhattan, to step up so that the colleagues who are in the building can find space to recover, grieve, commune with others, and then contribute in ways that make sense at a different point in time. And so the company sort of relaxed its leave policies for everyone in the World Trade Center through Thanksgiving of that year. And of course, many people chose to come back. Like I, for example, was back within a week because I needed to be with people who understood my experience. I mean, if I spent all that time with my parents, I think I would have gone crazy because like no one really got it. And so I benefited from the structures that were set up by Morgan Stanley to allow colleagues to come together, to talk, to support one another, and to recognize not everyone could just shut off flip a switch and like whatever happened sort of went away. So the way that it was ultimately handled after some conversations that needed to be happen was important, and I think there's a human-centered way to help respond to something like that can't be forgotten, whatever the traumatic event is that surrounds a workplace.
I mean, first of all, I wasn't there, but you sharing that story and just seeing it on the news, as a citizen of the United States, first of all, my heart still goes out to everyone affected on that day. Your coworkers, all the people in the building who are here and who are not here, and their families. I just can't imagine, as you're telling the story about, all right, how do we get everyone who was in the World Trade Center for your company back to work right away? I mean, it pains me just to hear that, because I think about, okay, at the end of the day, or at the center of it all, are humans. And I think a big topic that I'm hearing you talk about too is like, in the workplace, what is the role of emotional regulation, right? What is the role of companies in terms of supporting holistic well-being for people and employees? And I don't know that even back then that was a trend, right? Like it wasn't even a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there may have been early versions of EAP, employee assistance programs. They were smart enough to bring in counselors for people who wanted to. And I found it quite valuable to sit in those circles and, just talk, and for an employer to create space for people to have those experiences. I mean, you have to remember too, like we're very used to now, for those of us who are privileged enough to be able to work from home, which of course many people don't have that privilege, but if we were in a work from home environment, this issue of like getting back to the office would be very, very different. I mean, then it was, where are we physically going to put people, right? Like it wasn't really like, oh, well, 2,000 displaced people are just going to like log on from home necessarily. It was probably possible in some way, but I remember like the whole process of like logging in that environment or that time was very different. And so, the thing was like using conference rooms, and people who have their own offices have to share their offices and things like that. So all those decisions were made by by people who were trying to find ways to center the human beings that were affected by this, alongside of the business priorities that could not yield. So those things are often in tension, but there are ways to maybe not have them all in complete balance, but to not treat the workers who are affected by the event as afterthoughts.
That's right. And you're right. I think about, it was very different times back then, very traditional, where people would commute into the office and there was workspace, et cetera. And I think even today, though, I think about it's a comparison, but it's not the same. I think about the trauma that some people may have gone through going through this pandemic, right? Everyone reacted to it differently. This threat of, will I get sick, and will I possibly not live as a result of COVID, et cetera? This kind of going into the unknown. And for those who are responsible for, a lot of people were working as well, like, how do we get this work done? And the easy solution at that time was, all right, everyone kind of shelter at home and work from home. And then fast forward, it is about how do you balance the needs of the business as well as the needs of the human beings who now are emotionally affected in varying degrees, coming out of this pandemic. And, how do you do that? And so it's fascinating. I wonder about you and maybe folks that you worked with back then, like how they've landed in their careers and what they're championing and what they're doing in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixed bag in some ways. I think, there was one colleague who, um, maybe still even today, like if you work in an office building, some people are sort of the designated fire warden, or they're in charge
Wow.
of like safety drills, right? And the person who was that for our floor, kind of he did his duty, Paul, and because he did his duty, he survived. He got out, but he was there until the end, and somehow, like, literally saw the plane like turn and bank into the building, like X number of floors above, and was on leave for a year because of stress and trauma
Yeah.
related to that situation. And different people take different amounts of time to recover. But I found, of course, I was with the company for a long time after that. And I definitely found a sense of bonding and community in that group of people. There were at the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, there was a collective then, and the company was able to get like special passes for people who were in the building at the time when the memorials were put up. And there was sort of there's a through line that I think connects a lot of people that are affected by an experience like that. And there are lots of other things that people go through that bring that connection to them. And so it's weird in a way that so much of what affects you as a leader or as a person can be tied to the workplace, when I haven't really thought about it in quite that way till
Mm-hmm.
now, to a degree, which is like so much of what happened during my time there really influences who I think I am as a person, because you had the 9/11 experience of what I what I took from it, what I thought was really important, what worked well, what didn't work so well. And then I wasn't even out of the closet at this
Yeah.
time. That would only happen a number of years later. And um, just to scroll to that, like what was valuable also about part of my time at that company was they had resources, they had structures in place to support different communities. um, a pride group for LGBT employees, and I eventually got involved in that group, and I eventually led that group. And as a side hustle while I'm doing
Yeah.
my day-to-day job as a lawyer, which is its whole other sort of complicating thing. You have your day job and you have this other thing, and how do you balance that? But for me, like, the fact that that existed opened up an entire world to me as a person and as a worker, that I found community that I didn't even necessarily know existed, and I felt unburdened, and I felt free and more liberated and less distracted by what I was trying to conceal. That all of which helped me, I think, to thrive as a contributor. And so even today, when I see certain criticisms or pushback on inclusion related work, it makes me sad, because I see how meaningful it was for me to be able to contribute in a different way. And the investment that my company made in these initiatives took nothing away from anybody else, but just created greater opportunity for me to contribute in a more equal and fully formed way.
That's right. I mean, there's so much to unpack with what you just said. And I think about, the challenge today for talent. And I know there's different kinds of folks who participate on this call. I just saw our friend Jason, who is a CEO at his company. The big challenge right now is how do you get people to come work for us, right? And how do we get them to stay? And you brought up the topic of inclusion and the fact that there was an LGBT kind of group that helped support, that specific community within JP Morgan or Morgan Chase, where you were. And it allowed people, because you're spending 80, 100 hours a week, I'm assuming, working as hard as you can, giving your all. Um, it allowed you kind of the space to be more of who you are. I'm a big believer that from a cultural standpoint, the definition of culture, and I would love to hear your definition, is imagine an environment where the company, the managers allow employees to bring fully and exactly who they are into the workplace. And can you imagine when that occurs, all of the great ideas and or bad ideas, but everything that the employees bring into the workplace just brings great and diverse thinking, um, innovation, and then as a result, productivity into the workplace. And when you think about retention, especially today, one of the biggest challenges that I know a lot of my chief HR cohorts, colleagues talk about, there are things companies can be doing, which is recognizing humans, that they can create that space where they feel included and that they feel like they belong. And so, I don't know what you think about that and also what your definition of culture might be.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so attracted to the workplace dignity program at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, because the idea of an initiative focused on the workplace that's centered around the dignity of people. I mean, I look at dignity as our common denominator. We all have inherent value and worth. We're all equal in our dignity. Whatever the differences we have, we're all equal in the dignity that we have. We're born with inherent value and worth. It's what human rights principles around the world are built around, the concept of human dignity. And so, when we talk in our work that human rights don't end at the workplace door, I mean, it sort of makes sense because
Mm-hmm.
people are spending, a third of their lives or more at work. And so whether their dignity is fully realized, whether their value is fully appreciated, is so influenced by the workplace because they spend so much time there. We all do. And so it could be work can either be a major source of meaning in our life, or it could be a major source of insecurity, lack of respect, sort of a degrading experience. It could be one or the other. And I think it's on all of us as leaders to focus on workplace experiences that, create empowerment of the people who are there, where they're given independence to really contribute to their full potential without extensive oversight, where they feel safe, where they feel there's an investment in their development, and where people feel that there's a organizational sense of purpose that they can rally around in their own day-to-day work. That they understand how their own day-to-day work really is achieving a specific purpose that has been articulated by the organization. And I think good cultures sort of have structures in place and day-to-day leadership behaviors that advance those sorts of things. At the end of the day, people have lives beyond their work, but they want to feel that they have the opportunity to thrive and add to a specific mission and purpose that has been laid out before them, because hopefully that's why they joined the organization in the first place.
That's right. I think you're really touching on, especially this generation that is now in the workforce, Gen Z, and then we've got post Gen Z coming up. And I think it was that Gallup study that was back in 2019. It's not even about work life balance anymore. And it's not even about a job, but it's about my life and what it is that I'm doing. And if I'm contributing to a workplace, how does that fit within my life, which is a little different. It's interesting that you say workplaces are one or the other. I mean, based on my experience, just growing up in my career, I feel the same way. You either feel like you step into a box, and when you're in that box, you need to snap to the rules of the organization, right? And where you can't fully be yourself because there's certain ways of behaving, and you've got to get your professional vibe on. And I think what's evolved and I think everyone knows this, is that when companies can articulate their purpose and when people decide to stay or they decide to join because they're aligned with that purpose, they're finding more meaning, in the work that they're doing versus just showing up every day because they need a paycheck. Although, there are a lot of hourly workers out there who are doing just that because they need to make a living. Um,
Right.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it's useful to make that distinction because there's a big difference in the experience, and you're as familiar with this as anybody, but there's a big difference between the experience of what we might call frontline workers who are in hourly jobs, and what their priorities are versus what I might call office workers or knowledge workers, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, though, I think people want to feel like that their voice will be heard, that they're being seen, that they have some element of economic dignity, that whatever benefits and compensation is being offered to them, no matter what the work they do, at whatever level, that they and their families can lead dignified lives. And so, I think it's on all of us to find ways to understand what's important to our people, and to try to live up to the purpose and the mission that we say and the values that we say we have. And I think that's a really interesting point that's often glossed over. And you mentioned COVID and the pandemic. And I think a lot about, people were stuck at home. Again, I always like to caveat it with that,
Yeah.
if you have that privilege, right? Because so many people couldn't work from home, but many people were stuck at home, able to work from home. And it seemed in a lot of ways like the world was crashing in around us. You had COVID, you had the murder of George Floyd. And I remember, following a lot of that, the political environment was incredibly toxic, continues to be, of course, but people were inbounding all of that stuff, fearful for their own health and sitting at home. And then there's like, an insurrection at the Capitol. So
Yeah.
everything is sort of being bombarded on their TVs and everything else, social media. And there was a movement, and I'm based in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and there was a movement at the time where certain, tech leaders were really clamping down on what workers could talk about in the even virtual workspace in terms of external things. And I wrote a piece about this, and we could circulate it to the group later, but it's something like standing up against the shut up and work workplace was the headline, I think. And the point was, it's kind of a very privileged thing to say to your workers that they should put whatever's happening as it relates to George Floyd, as it relates to race and a racial reckoning, in some sort of box, even though they're working from home. Like, how are you leaving it at home if you're working from home, by the way? And what does it say if you have a commitment towards equity and justice, or whatever you want to call it, in your values, and you're basically saying shut up and work to, whether they're your white employees or your black employees or somebody else for whom these things really matter, or for their families. I go back to the Pulse nightclub shooting. I needed to take a beat. Like, my community was hurting, and I hurt, and it would have felt really harsh to say, no, 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 that's for there. I'm pointing over there.
Yeah. Right. Right.
That's for outside the window. And so I think these are hard things. You can't get into every issue, but there's certain things where this blanket prohibition on allowing people, recognizing that people have fully formed lives, so don't necessarily end when they stamp in and stamp out. So I feel you on some of the things you were alluding to there.
Yeah, I know. It just reminds me, and I bring this up time and again because it's just something that I'm fascinated about and I fully nerd out about, and it's old terminology. 1983, the emotional worker, right? So there was a book written by Hochschild called The Managed Heart. I think at UPenn, there's a whole like graduate study all around emotional laborers. I guess that's the terminology, where as part of their professional role, they have to regulate their emotions. So you think automatically frontline, hospitality, et cetera, and especially dealing with not happy customers or guests. And their role is to serve. Now, I feel that I can bring that fast forward, decades later and say, what is the space in culture and in companies, not only for overall, May is coming up, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And I know companies go all in on talking about mental health, and mental fitness. I think there's some space, though, to talk about emotional fitness and giving space to people that they are humans and that everyone, you said this earlier, as it relates to how people were coming back from that 9/11, your 9/11 story. And for some people, it took a lot of time. For some people, it takes a little time. It's just the whole point that you're saying that everybody is different. And I think going back to culture, and now this level of emotion that I think we need to recognize as part of the workplace, whether you're working from home or working in the office or whatever, that, the role that emotions play in the human beings and how do you allow that to create productivity inside a company. So I guess I'm saying the same thing you're saying, which is, the Pulse nightclub incident so impacted you and you had to take a beat and take a minute. And I think for employees and for leaders specifically, I want to get into that. Like, it's okay to not be okay. And I know you said that in kind of one of the articles that you've written, but, where is space for that in culture today and in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. And I think there is so much stigma even today. Things are improving. I think it's getting better, but there's a lot of stigma around mental health. And, even companies or other organizations that have resources to support the mental health and the emotional well-being of workers, whether it's an employee assistance program, whether it's ensuring that some, therapy or related services are included in health coverage. Those are sort of the structural things, right? Like in our work, we always think about like, what are the day-to-day things that leaders can do? And like, what are the structural things that an organization can do, right? Because when you're thinking about well-being, when you're thinking about dignity at work, leaders affect that day to day, but then the organization can put in structures that affect it more systemically. So for example, a benefits program is a structural thing. It affects all employees, and either it has some well-being type coverage woven into the benefits offering or it does not. But that's very different than a manager or a leader saying, you know what, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. I, as a leader of 10 people, 20 people, whatever, having the sort of leadership savvy or, sophistication on your own without necessarily even being prompted by the organization, which hopefully the organization is prompting people, but also not, to say, you know what, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. I have Jeffrey here from the benefits team to talk about what we offer you and why it's important for you to take advantage of these benefits. And if it's true, to have the confidence and the vulnerability to say, in fact, I've drawn on those benefits. I went through a really shitty situation last year and I was having difficulty. And you know what? This made a difference for me. You may not need it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's here for you and you're encouraged to take advantage of it, because a lot of these benefits, it's almost like parental leave sometimes, especially for fathers or, non-birth parents. The benefits are there, but people aren't necessarily taking advantage of them. And we need, as leaders, if we want to advance a culture of inclusion and well-being, to sort of find in our own day-to-day worlds opportunities to show a little vulnerability, show some investment and knowledge of the benefits that our organization offers, and create an opportunity for some discussion around those things.
Oh my God, I love this. I love this because it's not enough for organizations, for leaders, what I mean. So leaders saying, oh, well, my company provides employee assistance programs and, our benefits also provide access to mental health counselors or some form of coaching and counseling. I love what you're saying. And I always ask this in the CultureCast, like, what is the one thing leaders here on this culture cast can be doing to create a culture of inclusion, right? And I love that you said show some vulnerability, right? And even if you don't have vulnerability or you're not comfortable yet sharing a very personal story, what ideas do you have on showing the human side, of being a leader and supporting others?
Yeah.
What do you think?
So I think one other area for that um, is around like psychological safety at
Yeah,
work. Meaning, are you creating an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up? Not just speaking up because like maybe there's been a dignity violation or some, discrimination policy violation. I'm talking about creating a safe environment where people feel that they can bring up new ideas or a different way of looking at things, right? I think if you're creating the kind of cultures that we're talking about, you want people to feel like their voice will be heard, that that if they contribute something or they have a different point of view, they won't be sort of ridiculed for it or shut down in a box. And so I think leaders, in addition to like showing vulnerability as it relates to things like wellness and benefits, like if you as a leader find ways to communicate, maybe not with these exact words, but basically, I don't have all the answers all the time.
hmm,
I'm not always right. In fact, here's how I've been wrong, and here's what I've learned from it. If you show that vulnerability, I think it creates space for people to feel like, okay, I can speak up. My colleague, my manager, whomever, has made clear that they need my input. They need the benefit of the experience that I have, and you've created a runway for new ideas. The classic examples of where this goes awry is where there's a very sort of all-knowing, at least as projected by a leader or a manager, an all-knowing manager um, who doesn't really demonstrate a willingness to tolerate any dissent, and people keep errors hidden
yeah,
because there's a culture of mistakes aren't okay, as opposed to mistakes can be something to learn from. And when people feel that they need to hide mistakes or inefficiencies, that's when dangerous things can happen, like physical safety
yeah.
problems with vehicles or in an operating room or whatever the case may be. And so I think by showing vulnerability, I don't have all the answers. I messed this up last week and here's what I learned from it. Like, we need to talk about these things to be a better and a stronger team. I think you push the culture in a positive direction. And it's another way that vulnerability um, can really show up and add value to a team environment.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of being the leader who says, hey, I don't have all the answers. And actually, you're defining what I think diversity is for me and how I would love to experience it as I support teams, in the corporate environment. It is about like allowing all these ideas to exist and actually behaving in a way as a leader to just invite that conversation, right? Invite the ideas to come in. And that whole thing around vulnerability, I mean, I'll be vulnerable. I'll share this quickly, but yeah, I know I've got a few former team members who I've worked with, different companies who are on this call. And one thing that I did, which I thought, yikes, is this a flaw? Or am I just going to do this? Um, when I would get very specific, constructive, I'll just say even negative feedback from the person that I report to, right? And then that affects me, right? And it's like, all right, how do I learn and grow from that? And I found that when I would go back to my team, especially my direct reports, I would say, I got this feedback and it doesn't feel great. And I need your help showing up differently. What can I be doing differently? How can you help me do this? And I think from a true place of vulnerability as a leader, part of it is I'm sharing this with you because if I am leading this team, this is not a reflection of you, but it's a reflection of me and how others just might perceive the function that we are a part of. And they're like, I found in doing that, first of all, I've learned a lot because there's so many ideas that I would not have solved the problem on my own because people are like, have you thought about it this way? here's something that I'm thinking about. But also, it's getting back to a place that you're talking about, which is when you show vulnerability and you create this place of psychological safety, it is about trust ultimately, right? Do people trust you and trust each other to actually come in and do their best work and be their full selves? And so, anyway, I just shared that. I thought it was the wildest thing and crazy when I did that, but I also grew as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, and I love the bringing sort of trust into the conversation a
Yeah.
little bit. I think, um, you know, we've spent a lot of time looking at some of the trust work that's out there, and how foundational it is to a thriving organizational culture. It gets back to like, um, I think you may have mentioned it in a post you did recently. Organizations made all sorts of commitments, coming out of George Floyd or otherwise. And even they may have in their own organizational values, very broad aspirational
Yeah.
statements. And, trust is a really interesting thing. It's so crucial. And the company Edelman has this thing called the trust barometer.
Yep.
And what's really cool about the trust barometer, maybe a little surprising to people, is that, of most entities, the people trust, what they call my employer, more than any other institution, more than government, more than the media, more than NGOs, whatever. Um, and that means that there's this unique opportunity. There's this inherent reservoir of trust that exists between people and their employer. But like all things, and what's great about that is like if you're a smart organization, you could tap into that reservoir and
Yes.
really leverage it for something really amazing. But with your actions or inactions, you could degrade trust really quickly as an organization or as a leader. And so if you're whatever, the walk, talk the talk, if your actions don't match your words, like
Yep.
if you have a great marketing team and PR team, but it's all like fluff and there's not a lot of there, or if you're an organization sort of putting out a lot of stuff into the marketplace, but your people back at home aren't feeling the juice, trust can degrade pretty quickly. And so, if you are a leader, I think it's important to not like sort of overextend your commitments. Like, what are you actually able to deliver?
Yeah.
What are you able to get behind as a leader? Because, if you go off with 10 things that you say you're going to do for your people or your team, and you're only really, and you're really only going to get one of them done, if you haven't managed people's expectations, their trust in your ability to deliver for them is going to diminish pretty quickly. It's kind of hard to recover from that.
That's right. Actually, that's such a good nugget too for everyone around commitments you make to your people and the follow through on it, right? And the revisiting of it, not just I'm going to run off and do it. I also think you come back and when it is done, engaging with the team and asking for feedback on how that landed, whatever those commitments were, and then what can we learn from it and what can we be doing differently or better, right? So that it's ongoing. I love that too. I do want to jump in on specifically the workplace dignity program that you lead at RFK Human Rights. So what does that mean? So if I'm sitting at a company right now and I'm looking at Jeffrey Siminoff, I read all about you. So what is it that your team, your organization does in support of, companies who are sitting on this call or companies who are researching you?
Yeah. So, again, the work is built around the principle of dignity at work. And there's a specific human rights underpinning for that. There's this thing that many people may not be aware of, but it's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it covers many aspects of the way people live in their lives around the world, which includes their workplace. And what the Declaration commits to is workplaces that are just and favorable. That's the sort of anchoring quote. And remuneration that allows people to lead dignified lives. So that's sort of our small c constitution,
Yeah.
if you will, that sort of guides our work as an organization and as a program. And we're really focused on drawing from Bobby Kennedy's legacy of human rights activism and a focus on workers' rights, and really translating it to specific action in the work that we do. And we do it through really four principal ways. One is we focus on equipping organizations and leaders with resources and tools so they can actually make something happen. And we have a website. If you go to rfkhumanrights.org, there's a specific workplace dignity website out there. And it's not just a description. Our website is actually sort of a how-to for the two sort of verticals that I mentioned earlier. You have this sort of day-to-day leadership vertical, and you have the organization structural vertical. So if you want to think differently about recruiting and onboarding and compensation and benefits, we got you. If you're a leader and you want to think about how do I foster trust on my team? How do I create a more open and safe environment? How do I really leverage differences that exist on this team that I have? We got you too. And we wanted to, as a human rights organization, sort of open source and publish this information so people could sort of immediately draw on specific actions. In addition to that first element of equipping organizations with tools, we also provide consulting services for organizations who maybe a specific team needs support, or quite frankly, even an individual executive or leader needs some independent objective support, and we do that as well. Second thing that we do is we use our voice to sort of shape the narrative in this space. So that means speaking about workplace dignity, really getting beyond the sort of specific diversity, equity, and inclusion lens to a more fulsome understanding of what dignity at work could mean, which includes inclusion at work, but is not limited to that. So we speak, we do discussions like this, we write, we publish op-eds and essays, and we're pretty active on social media. Please follow me if you'd like. I'm on Twitter, JMS San Fran, and I'm also on LinkedIn, and so is our organization. We also create forums that bring different communities together to discuss workplace challenges that may be industry specific or worker specific. So for example, next month we have a Book and Journalism Awards as an organization. We obviously care about the work experience of journalists, so we may convene a specific conversation around journalists as workers. And as an organization, one of our key focus areas is sort of developing and empowering the next generation of human rights leaders. And so we focus on human rights education, pre-college. And so we also think of educators as workers. And finally, we think a lot about how can we use our voice and our communities to advance legislation, policy, and movements that are focused on workplace change. So those are, the four areas that we spend time focusing on. We'd love to connect with folks, and we would love for individuals for whom the idea of dignity at work is something that resonates to them to help amplify our messages and this movement towards workplaces that really embrace and empower and protect the inherent value and worth of people in this place where they spend so much of their life's time.
Oh my goodness. I think you just gave a gift. I'm very familiar with the website on workplace dignity at rfkhumanrights.org. So aside from all of the amazing kind of pieces of advice, there's a lot of great tools there that people can use for their organization and that they can use for themselves. And I think a theme that I'm hearing too is, look, it takes leadership to make this happen, right? So not just organizations, but you as an individual who are listening in on this conversation, it takes your leadership to take that next step. And so I love that you have all those tools there, Jeffrey. I want to pivot just for something fun, since I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. I always love asking. So pop culture, I know we talked a lot about culture and how we can actually close this divide that's happening through really recognizing people and what their worth, right? Treating people with dignity in the workplace and just generally in life, but treating them with dignity in work. I think about pop culture too, which is part of life. And like you as a human being, we've learned so much about you And I so appreciate how open and vulnerable you were to share your specific story around 9/11. But then let's talk about something fun. So, like, what are you into these days? What are you wearing? What are you listening to? What are you watching? Anything fun like that?
Yeah. So thank you. Love the topic. Um, I'm a big food person. I'm a big restaurant. I'm obsessed with interesting food, and so I am always on the lookout for new and exciting restaurants, especially restaurants where I read this article recently from a woman who's a graduate student at Stanford, and she was really focused on like so many people who are foodies are like, where is this from? Where did you source this? Where did you source that? And the thesis of her piece in the New York Times was, but are you really asking or like educating yourself on how the restaurant may be treating its workers? And it's an interesting thing about like what intention we bring to different things we enjoy. Do you want to be a White Lotus guest, or do you want to be a different type of guest who's approaching your service experience in a different way? I do love the White Lotus, by the way.
Yeah,
um, and I'm very mindful of that show when I go on different experiences that mean a lot to me. So I think about food is a big thing, and sort of like the experience of I'm a regular at a certain restaurant in San Francisco, and those folks are like they're my family now. Like I love them, and you know I feel like they're a part of each other's lives. And a lot of times I say like you get what you give, right? And all
totally.
experience, right, Marisa? Like you get what you give, and so can you put a little goodness out there? You can, and you'll get a little goodness back. And so anyway, I think about that a lot. And then obviously well, I don't know if obviously, but I'm caught up on Succession, and I don't want to do any spoilers, so I'll keep my mouth shut on that. But
Same.
right.
Oh
I
my
know there's
gosh.
stuff
Right. It's
about.
crazy, right?
We'll have
No
to go off.
spoilers. Right. In case people are watching it. Although I do want to circle back. I mean, here you are coming through as Jeffrey in your experience, not only with food, but the people behind the food. I love
Mhm.
that. And the experience of the worker. I am too a White Lotus fan.
Yeah,
Wild, right? When you look at behind the scenes, people shouldn't be treated this way, and they're delivering this amazing experience for guests. And so I love that you take that into even you as a foodie, just the experience you have, not only with the amazing food, but the people, and not only how they treat you, but having a feeling of how they're being treated, I think is interesting. And I agree with you too. You give what you get in the world, right?
mm,
Put goodness out there, it'll come back to you. Maybe not immediately, but it'll happen.
yeah.
Um,
Better to live your
anyway.
life that way, I think, than otherwise. And I guess season 3 of White Lotus is going to be in Thailand. Apparently, I just read. So
Oh,
something.
really?
So yeah, see,
Oh, that'll be
you're
crazy.
here
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. And actually, Succession's really interesting too. We won't even get into the storyline, but it's an interesting look too at family in the workplace, and actually how people are treated as well. It's fascinating.
Well, I think, I know we just have 2 minutes, but I would just
Yeah.
say very quickly on that point, I think, we can have a whole separate segment on, the idea of work as family, which is a very complicated thing. I think it's a complicated cultural thing as a leader to, sort of position your workplace as the family, because it's a complicated thing for a lot of people, and they may necessarily want to work with their family. Obviously, it's a very different question when the family is actually working in the workplace, which is the Succession story. But this idea of like everyone here is part of the family is very noble and salutary in concept. But the practicalities of that is like, I don't necessarily know that I want to work with my siblings or feel that I
Yeah.
have to have that kind of relationship with the people I'm working with. For some people, it made complete sense, but not for everybody.
Yeah. You're right. One size does not fit all. And I think it still brings it all back to that vulnerability, the humanity, the trust that a leader brings into a team where it's not just workers, but it's actually human beings that are part of what it is you're trying to create in the workplace. And so, with that, I know we're coming to the top of the hour. First of all, I heart you so much. My heart goes out to you. I heart that we know so much about you and that you're just so open about it. And thank you so much for all of the good thinking, the good resources, and really the movement that you are leading and that you are creating through RFK Human Rights. I really appreciate you. And
And
yeah,
And I
Go
would
ahead.
just say, Cal, you've been a wonderful friend, a great contributor and supporter, and just a valued person in my life. And I appreciate what you're doing and just being connected to your world always. Thank you.
Well, always. I mean, I'm feeling a little love fest here. I think Cheryl Haskins was asking, hey, I got here late. Where can I watch this? So, everyone, this can be rewatched on LinkedIn right after this is done. Also, you can head over to my website that's been up on the screen. You can click into this and any other CultureCast, as well as CultureCast with Marisa on Apple, Spotify, and Google. And so there are many ways for you to catch up to this content and to see Jeffrey's full conversation. If you got in a little late, it's totally fine. And I hope I can see all of you with the next live CultureCast, which will be on Tuesday, April 25th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Our next guest is Jeremy Utley, who is a professor at Stanford. And we're going to be talking about the role of creativity and diversity. So, with that, everyone, have a great, great Thursday and hopefully a Friday Junior, right? Let's go into the weekend strong.
Here, here. Thank
All
you.
right, all. Good to see you all. Bye.